just got in my car and have never been back to that campus. Because my faith, my walk with the Lord is more important than any piece of paper or anything on this face of this earth. So then I decided to go into a profession that doesn't mess with your head. I went into construction. No such thing as a board stretcher. You cut a board short, it's your fault. Measure twice, cut once, a very fact-based environment. I ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, running my construction company, raising my family. And then in my later 30s, I had a chance to go to a major Christian university there. My wife worked there, word processing. She managed that department. And the spouses, after 3 years of the wife working there, spouse could go free. And it was an expensive school. And so I thought, well, okay, I can, cut a few hours out of work and go take some classes. Well, I stayed away from education, hadn't figured all that stuff out yet, stayed away from theology, and focused on my heart's interest, which was European history and philosophy. Took a lot of classes. One professor earned his doctorate degree on how Hitler had taken the minds of the youth and restructured them for his own purpose. I took every Russian and German and European history class he offered. Another professor earned his doctorate degree on the French Revolution. We're practicing the principles of the French Revolution. It's really tough watching TV because I see those events. Most Americans don't because we haven't really been instructed in what happened, what motivated the directorate and why that revolution took place and the effect it had on that culture. Then I took a law class under John Whitehead. He's argued cases before the Supreme Court. He insisted that we go to the source. Don't read material secondhand, read the original stuff. So we read the framing of the Constitution, those minutes, and then we read up to 1,600 pages of Supreme Court decisions. Notice back in the 50s, the court started writing, we don't know what those framers meant. Well, that's like your lawyer saying, reading your will, saying, I don't know what he meant. Well, there's trouble a brew. Those judges could certainly know, and they did know what those framers meant. They just didn't want to go the same direction that this nation was framed upon. And so we certainly have seen the effect of the courts in changing the way they thought. In fact, they were trained, and they were applying the very same method I was trained in college and was supposed to apply to all the students that came into my classroom. Then the last classes I took was from a professor to earn his doctorate degree out of Harvard, but in a unique place because I had had several professors from Harvard, but he had earned his doctorate degree in communist Yugoslavia. I had a chance to study Tito's form of Marxism, unique amongst all the other Marxist countries, satellite to Moscow. Those guys were under a lot of pressure. They were fairly young and their hair turned gray within half a year because all of the rest of the Soviet Union was looking at them, how to restructure their way of thinking. Well, I studied the Soviet system, the Politburo form of government, enjoyed all this intellectual challenge, went back to construction full time. You don't talk about eminentizing the eschaton to the guy putting shingles on next to you. So it was just some data in my brain, I thought. Then about 27 years ago, Goals 2000 came on the scene. I watched TV for a couple of weeks, and I started talking to my TV. I don't know if you ever talked to your TV. I kept saying we can't be this stupid. This is everything I had learned to destroy other nations, and here we were fully embracing and applying it to our nation. So the Lord sent me back to the university. Now this time, it wasn't for a class or a grade. It was to go to the source. Bill Spady is a PR man for Goals 2000, and he mentioned 4 men that were foundational to his thought. And if you ever want to find out an expert comes into your community and they're suggesting a way of thinking, go find their source. You know, who are their professors? What did they write? What if they have a doctorate? Get a hold of that doctorate. If they wrote a book, read their book. Go to their source. Find out what's motivating them. And so that's what I did. Well, Spady mentioned 4 men: Benjamin Bloom, John Carroll, James Coleman, and James Block. Well, I didn't remember the last 3, but I can usually tell who the teachers are in the room because every teacher in your community has to sit in a college, Christian or secular, and learn to apply Bloom's taxonomies in the classroom. You're not going to be certified unless you know that material. So I took the books off the racks and began to read them. Now, that's not what you do in college. When you get Bloom's taxonomies, these books, you don't get these books. In the back half of the book, there's how to apply it. That's what you get. You're not instructed on what it's all about. You're just instructed on how to apply it in the classroom. Because the first part of the book is written in a different language. Undergraduates certainly aren't going to understand it. You won't get this material unless you're in your master's or your doctorate level. It's written in the language of social psychology. It's a foreign language. And by the way, by page 3, you're already thinking you had some dishes to wash, you had some lumber you wanted to move. You're going to do everything possible not to have to read this material. But if you sold your soul to the profession and it's required, this is reading for your master's or doctorate, you're going to apply yourself to it. Well, by page 6, again, most people, unless they're in it, don't read it. He says this is a classification system. Now, it's called taxonomy. The first book came out in 1956. Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, Book 1, Cognitive Domain. Now, cognition is knowledge. We would think knowledge would apply to facts and truth, and that was what the teachers were supposed to be teaching, the basics, so that the child could leave there and deal with the issues of life. But no, he says this is not a classification system of facts. This is a classification system of psychology. The whole book. That's illegal. See, it's illegal for me to do psychological analysis with the purpose of changing your child without your knowledge or permission. And yet that's the only purpose for this book. And then on page 32, he says, we recognize the point of view that truth and knowledge is only relative and that there are no lasting truths for all times and all places. Now, he paraphrased a famous philosopher who said, in the eyes of the dialectical philosophy, nothing is absolute, nothing is sacred. Well, who is this famous philosopher that Bloom, by the way, he was very studious in citing his sources, forgot to cite? Well, truth and knowledge is only relative. There are no lasting truths for all times and all places. He paraphrased Karl Marx. So not only was I trained in psychological analysis of your child for the purpose of changing them, I was also trained from a Marxist curriculum system. Because Karl Marx said we must educate the educators. And so that's what I was trained in. I was trained from a Marxist training manual, as every certified teacher in your community today is certified in. In fact, all Christian and secular schools, when they're accredited, are accredited according to Bloom's taxonomies. In fact, in the back part of the book, he says this will destabilize the students in the classroom. So we've certainly seen a lot of destabilization coming out of education. Now, I'm not against education, but I am against certain methods that are applied in the classroom. Well, so we know right away after this that the cognitive domain doesn't deal with what you and I might think it is dealing with. It's not dealing with truth, it's dealing with relativism. Then the second book came out in 1964 called Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, Book 2, Affective Domain, Feelings Domain. Well, there's another one, R.H. Dave published out of the UN. It's the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, Book 3, Psychomotor Domain. So if you follow this way of thinking, there's only 3 parts to you and me. There's the cognition, the data, there's the affection, the heart, and there's the psychomotor, what everything has to work through. You know, I have a great mind for music and a heart for music, but the psychomotor's not cooperating. I never could get past chair 3 on clarinet. It just, my fingers just wouldn't cooperate. So some people, we're all unique, because some of us are talented and yet we have no passion for it, you know, or we have passion but we just can't think it through, and so that makes us all special and unique in the way that we deal with life. So what is this process, this taxonomy? Well, a taxonomy is simply a method for classifying. If you cook, you better have taxonomy working for you. You don't just grab anything that looks white in the cabinet and put it in whatever you're making, cake or pie. You make sure it's either salt or sugar or baking soda or baking powder, whatever you're requiring, because you want to have a determined outcome. Notice it was educational objectives. In other words, what kind of curriculum or environment am I going to use in my classroom? The environment or the curriculum or the condition directly affects how the children think. And so that's important to understand. I'm going to go through this taxonomy tonight. I want to show you the dialectic process is all about classifying you. I was trained in how to map the room, how to map the way the children thought, whether they were traditional in their way of thinking, whether they're transitional or they're transformational. And the purpose was to change them. We find this is called a new